Nina Carter stood at her kitchen window, clutching her morning coffee as she gazed out. A grey sky, bare tree branches, and a silent city, much like the emptiness she felt inside. This morning was no different from the others, quiet, unadorned, alone. But everything changed with the shrill ring of her phone. She didn't recognize the incoming number. For a moment she hesitated. Then her finger moved on its own to hit answer. "Hello," she said hesitantly. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but earnest, trembling. "Hello. Am I speaking to Nina Carter?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Pastor Raymond from your grandmother's church. I'm sorry to call with such news, but your father, Richard Carter, passed away this morning." Nina's hand suddenly turned to ice. The coffee mug nearly slipped from her grip. She set it down on the table with trembling fingers. Her eyes locked onto a point in the distance. For a moment, everything in the room stopped. The ticking clock, the hum of the radiator, the distant traffic, all fell silent. "Pardon," she managed to whisper. "Your father, he suffered a heart attack and died in the early hours. Your mother asked me to tell you, but she also made it clear that she doesn't want to speak with you." Nina held the phone away from her ear and stared at the screen for several seconds. Then she found her voice again. "When is the funeral?" "Tomorrow around midday, but... Your family, especially your mother, doesn't want you to attend. She told me explicitly. She's not welcome here." Nina felt a knot tighten in her throat. Her heart didn't pound with anger, but with a familiar, silent disappointment she'd known all her life. This was not her first experience of being excluded, but to learn of her father's death, and then to be told she was an unwelcome outsider at his funeral. That was beyond even heartbreak. After hanging up, Nina remained seated at the table for a long time, staring at an old photograph on the wall. In that picture, she was a little girl laughing as her father carried her on his shoulders. That child, smiling so freely, still existed in that frame. But now, that girl had grown up, was alone, and seemingly deemed unworthy of mourning her own father's death. Eventually, tears gathered in Nina's eyes, but she did not let them fall. Her throat ached, but she felt something deeper than sadness. A bond had been severed, and at the other end of that bond there was nothing. Late that night, she opened her journal and wrote a single sentence. "My father is dead, and my mother erased me from even his funeral. I am no longer one of them, but I am still the author of my own story." Nina couldn't sleep all night. As hours passed, her mind wore her out far more than her body. She sat in her armchair until dawn, her head drooping, her arms wrapped around her knees. Every time she closed her eyes, her father's face appeared, and then her mother's blank stare echoed in her mind. By morning, she had made a decision. She would put an end to this silence once and for all. She picked up her phone and dialed her mother's number. The first few rings went unanswered. Then an automated voice said, "The number you have dialed is not available at the moment. Please try again later." Nina lowered the phone. She tried again, with the same result. On the third attempt, her voice trembled as she begged the empty line. "Please, just pick up. Just one word is enough." But there was no answer. All day long, silence settled over every corner of the house. She didn't play music or turn on the television. She closed the curtains and pulled the blinds. She felt something inside her slowly breaking apart. That afternoon, a message arrived on her phone. The screen showed her mother's name. For a moment, Nina's finger hovered above the screen, a small spark of hope. Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. She opened the message. Her body iced over at the words, "We don't love you anymore. You're not welcome at your father's funeral." It was not a sentence, but a knife. So simple, so direct, so merciless that Nina's eyes froze on the screen. The "maybe they still love me" hope she'd carried all those years was buried forever in that moment. "We don't love you anymore." It might have been the heaviest thing a mother could say to her child. Once love had existed, now utterly denied, as if she were no more than a piece of furniture to be discarded. Nina set her phone down. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard, and finally, a single word escaped her lips. Fine. But that fine was not acceptance. It was a closing of a door, a vow that she would never call that woman mother again. Late that night, she wrote in her journal, "She chose not to love me, with a sentence as cold as my father's death. But now I must love myself, because no one else will." She didn't delete the message. She took a screenshot and saved it. Some wounds need to remain visible, not to be remembered or forgotten, but to heal. The next morning, she stood before the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red, but her expression was resolute. Their love did not build me. I grew up with absence, but now I will be completed with my own voice. For Nina Carter, childhood was not filled with vibrant memories, but with silent looks, half hugs, and a sense of non-existence. Her family was always there, but never truly for her. The house was full, yet it held a constant void. When she was small, she would wait in her mother's kitchen for hours, trying to win her attention. She drew pictures and proudly held up her star-shaped teacher-marked worksheets, saying, "Look, Mom, my teacher said I'm the best." Her mother would raise an eyebrow, glance at the crooked line, and say only, "You didn't draw that line straight." No achievement deserved praise, and no disappointment merited consolation. Her mother, Laura, was like a brick wall, cold, distant, controlling. Love was a reward to be earned on her terms, and most of the time, it wasn't given. Nina never knew the rules, so she assumed she must always be not enough. Her father, Richard, was present but never really there. Always a silent figure in the living room, sitting in front of the television. He complied with whatever her mother said, and remained passive toward his children. At every outburst from Laura, his eyes dropped to the floor. Once, when Nina was quietly crying in her room, she crept to his door and whispered, "Dad, am I a bad kid?" In the darkness, he turned his head but said nothing. He simply reached out, stroked her hair, and quietly closed the door. That was his way, wordless, unresponsive, unable to repair the rift. Nina had a younger brother, Oliver. He was always more noticed, more loved. When he broke something, it was childish. When her tears fell, it was weakness. In the family map of affection, Nina's name was never marked. By the time puberty came around, she had learned silence. She stopped arguing, becoming effectively invisible, because no matter how loud she cried, no one listened. When she was accepted to university, her mother's only comment was, "I hope you don't drop out." Nina had screamed inside, "I hope one day you simply say, 'Good job.'" But that day never came. Years later, sitting in her own apartment, her family remained a phantom in her mind. Their bodies might have been alive, but to her, they were ghosts. All the moments that should have been filled with love were instead occupied by silence, rejection, and empty chairs. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I was born into a family, but I never really grew up in it. Everyone had a face, but no one had a heart. And now I understand, I am the child who escaped from the house of ghosts." When Nina Carter turned 20, she made her first real decision in life. She left. It was not an escape, but an exile, and the voice that pushed her out was her own mother's. That summer, the house was tense. Her father had lost his job, and her mother was more irritable than ever. Oliver had flunked his exams, and the home's anger was directed straight at Nina, because she was the one who looked so proper on the outside, but was always guilty on the inside. That day, as she was washing dishes in the kitchen, she heard her mother's heels clicking in the hallway. Sharp, severe footfalls. Without turning around, Nina said, "Mum, the university dorm called." "I might have to move in." Before the sentence was halfway out, her mother's voice cut her off. "Go, Nina. There's no peace left in this house. You are nothing like your father. You can't even be like Oliver, always playing the victim, always those pained looks. I'm tired of you trying to make us feel guilty. You're a curse on this house." At that moment, the soapy plate in Nina's hand slipped to the floor. It didn't break, but something inside Nina did. The tiny, trembling hope, "Maybe one day my mother will see me," was buried forever in that instant. She turned to face her mother, not speaking, just looking. Then she said, "Fine. You're right, I'll go. But I know one day you will choke on those words." She didn't say goodbye to her father. He just averted his eyes in the corner as usual. Oliver was plugged into his music, oblivious to everything. Nina packed a single suitcase, 3 shirts, 2 books, some money, and a journal. That was all she owned. She walked out the front door without looking back, because the house had not been hers for a long time. That first night in the dormitory, she didn't cry. Loneliness was not new to her, but freedom was something entirely unfamiliar and a little terrifying. Over time, she learned to stand on her own 2 feet. She worked, she studied, and she quietly grew. But the echo of those words, "You are a curse on this house," never fully left her. Every achievement brought it back, and every misstep reminded her, "See, I was right." Yet Nina learned to silence that voice, living her past without denying it. But she had not forgiven, at least not yet. That night, she wrote, "I was exiled from my home, but that moment was actually the door to my own kingdom." After leaving home, Nina found that not all doors closed behind her, or at least, she clung to the hope they hadn't. Despite her mother's voice still echoing in her ear, a little corner of her heart whispered, "Maybe one day, maybe in a single sentence." Her first attempt to reach out was on her college graduation. 3 days before the ceremony, she emailed her mother, simple, earnest, broken, yet hopeful. "My graduation is on Friday. If you'd like to come, I have a seat for you. Even if you're still angry, I'd like you to be there." No reply, nothing. On the day of the ceremony, she scanned the crowd, eyes darting at every blonde woman. But then she reminded herself, "You chose to stand on your own. Do that now, alone." Her second attempt came on her 25th birthday. She sent a card in her mother's favorite floral envelope, written in her own hand. "I'm still here and I still miss you." The envelope came back with a note, recipient not accepting. That was all the answer she needed. Her third and final attempt was the day she landed in the hospital. She'd had an accident, hurt her shoulder, her head bandaged. As she emerged from the ER, she dialed Oliver, whom she hadn't seen or spoken with in years. Maybe he'd changed his number, but to her surprise, he answered. "Nina?" "Yes, hi." A long silence. "What happened?" "Just thought you should know. I was in a little accident, but I'm okay." Silence. "Do you want me to put Mum on?" "If possible, yes." Her mother never called back that night. The next day, she received a message from Oliver. "Mum thinks you're still seeking attention. She says she can't keep reminding us of herself with every drama." At that moment, Nina understood. No matter how hard she tried, in their eyes, asking for love was weakness. Trying to reconcile was desperation. When a person is alone, they are sad. But when abandoned by their family, they become diminished. A part of them stays broken. Nina decided she would no longer write. She didn't slam doors, but she withdrew her hands. Because love that isn't reciprocated eventually drains you. That day, she wrote in her journal, 3 times I knocked on the door, 3 times greeted by silence. I did not give up. They never began. Trying to be loved has become exhausting. So now, I will just work on reclaiming myself. In the days following her father's death, Nina sank deep into silence. She didn't feel that she had lost someone. She felt she had been pushed out of her own life. Being excluded from her father's funeral was more than being abandoned. It was the denial of her very existence. Her phone didn't ring for days, no calls, no messages. No word from Oliver. She had ceased expecting anything from her mother. Still, the silence around her was deafening. Then one afternoon, a notification arrived. Unusual, unexpected. A number she didn't recognize appeared on her screen. R. Whitmore. Her eyes widened. The name rang a bell, an echo from years ago. Mr. Whitmore, her father's old co-worker, had always been kind to her as a child, offering chocolate, watching her with gentle, watchful eyes. She opened his message. "Nina, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but your father's funeral is this Saturday at 2 p.m., Greenwood Cemetery. I know your mother said she didn't want you there, but I believe you have the right to say goodbye." As soon as Nina read those words, she dropped her coffee mug. Her heart pounded. Rage and gratitude warred inside her. So much swelled in her chest, but no single word could express it. All she managed to type in response was, "Thank you. This message means more than you know." She set the phone down softly. Her mind drifted backward. Her father's pen gift on her birthday, their silent Sunday movie afternoons. And above all, he had always looked at her with something close to remorse, something unspoken. In her mother's shadow, her father had felt he could not protect his daughter, but she, in her father's eyes, had read a silent plea. "I wish I could have defended you better." Now she had a chance to say goodbye, not out of obligation, not with an invitation, but with a moral imperative. That night, Nina pasted Mr. Whitmore's message into her journal and wrote beneath it, "Sometimes the deepest bonds are not forged by blood. A stranger who remembered me, who saw me. That stranger reminded me how to feel at home again." She laid out her black dress on the end of her bed for the next day and whispered to herself, "They may not want me, but I will be there, because I'm going to reclaim my right to say goodbye." Saturday dawned under a grey sky. The air was neither rainy nor sunny, just dull, much like Nina felt inside. She donned her black dress, a simple knee-length style. Around her neck, she wore the old necklace her father had given her, a tiny, faded compass. He used to say, "If you ever lose your way, this will always find you." As she arrived at the cemetery gate, she slowed her steps. In the distance, she saw a cluster of people dressed in black, some bowed heads, some whispering. But her eyes searched for one figure who had been taken from her, her father. She knew she wouldn't find him, but she looked anyway. Then her gaze settled on two familiar faces at the gate. Her mother, Laura, standing stiffly next to her cousin Denise. As Nina approached, her mother lowered her glasses and fixed her with a cold, hard expression. Denise stepped forward, anger and scorn lacing her voice. "What are you doing here?" Nina, never breaking eye contact, said calmly, "This is my father's funeral. I came to say goodbye." Her mother's lips thinned and she shook her head. "Leave." "What? Leave? He wouldn't want you here." Those words were a second knife lodged in Nina's heart. The first had been her father's death. This was the tombstone of her erasure. A few in the crowd turned to look at them. Mr. Whitmore caught Nina's eye from a distance, apology and helplessness in his gaze. Denise advanced as if she might physically push Nina away. "You're the disgrace of this family. You always come here to make a scene." Nina took a steadying breath and faced her mother with resolve. "I didn't come to make a scene. I simply came to say goodbye to my father. But you've shrunk so small that you can't even share his grave." Her mother said nothing, turning her face away. Denise fell silent too, her anger still simmering. Nina closed her eyes and, before stepping away, knelt at the cemetery gate. She placed her hand on the earth and whispered, "Goodbye, Dad. They didn't want me here, but know this, I came, and I will not forget you." A tear slid down her cheek and merged with the soil, like all the words she'd held inside over the years, now becoming a silent farewell. She rose, wiped her eyes, and walked away. She felt no shame in those tears. They were her right. That night, Nina wrote, "I was banished from the funeral, but no one can bar my soul's door." My father may not have been strong, but I became strong. Today, not for him, but for me, I walked forward. At the cemetery gate, Nina heard her mother's icy decree again. Leave. He wouldn't want you here. But this time she did not turn and walk away. This wasn't just a funeral. This was the moment her silenced voice, her hidden identity, her erased existence stood before her. She resolved to walk in, saying to herself, "Not today." Her black dress fluttered slightly in the breeze. Faces around her turned, some in shock, some in anger, but none greeted her or made space. It was as if the cemetery itself refused to swallow her. A short line had formed to pay respects at the graveside. People moved past the casket, bowing their heads, offering prayers, placing flowers. Nina joined the line, but the people before and behind her turned away, their faces directed at the empty space where they assumed she didn't belong. Conversations became whispers, and glances grew harsh. A woman intentionally bumped her shoulder. A man muttered, "Shameless." But Nina held her head high, focusing only on the casket. Her father's casket was dark walnut, topped with white lilies. Though it was not the same warmth she had last known him by, his final warmth seemed to rest inside that wooden box. Nina took one more step forward and her breath caught. Something inside her shattered, then something new was born. She bent down, clasped her hands, and closed her eyes. With a whisper, she said, "I'm here. I don't forgive you, Dad, but I am here because I love you." Just as she was about to place her flower, a shout erupted from behind. "Enough!" It was her mother, voice trembling, losing control. "I told you you are not wanted here." Nina turned around, closer than ever to her mother. They were eye to eye, but now even Laura's eyes wavered, because Nina would not leave. She would not obey. She would not be afraid. Laura reached for her purse, grabbed her phone, and announced to those around, "I'm calling the police. An uninvited person has come here to sabotage this ceremony." For a moment, the crowd fell silent. Mr. Whitmore stepped in as if to intervene, but Nina shook her head. She silently signaled, "Stop." Then, looking directly at her mother, she said, "You can erase me from your life, but not from my father's farewell." No siren sounded, but Nina's internal scream was silenced, and that, in itself, was a victory. That night, she wrote, "She called the police on me, because even sharing my grief was a threat to her. But I was there. I went, I said my goodbyes, and for the first time, I did so without asking permission." After leaving the ceremony, Nina walked to the church's entrance, where silence greeted her again, yet this time, the silence brimmed with unspoken whispers. As she walked between the pews, her shoes clicked against the wooden floor. She noticed people turning away quickly as she passed, first a few curious glances, then nods of recognition, and then whispers began. One voice came from the back row. "Is that Nina?" "Yes, the one they disowned." Another voice replied, "Do you think her mother still hasn't forgiven her?" "I doubt it, but look, they came again." Each whispered phrase felt like a sting, but Nina's face remained unchanged. Only one thought crossed her mind. "I will conquer you not with your words, but with my silence." She stopped a few rows behind the altar, at the edge of a pew. No one offered her a seat. She remained standing at the back. Then something shifted, the tone of the whispers. The elderly woman in the front row leaned over to her neighbor and whispered, "Richard used to say how proud he was of her." "Really?" "Yes. He told people at work, 'My daughter has become a strong woman.'" Those words cracked something inside Nina. A piece of her heart warmed at the knowledge that her father, even once, had felt pride in her, yet never told her. Her eyes welled with tears. But these tears were not born of loneliness. They came from the relief of a long overdue acknowledgement, slowly emerging from a stranger's lips. Somewhere, sometime, her father had been proud of her, and never said so. Nina bowed her head. For the first time in a long time, she felt a gentle warmth where there had been only coldness. because despite all the banishment, despite the exclusion and the silencing, her name still echoed, and this time it was not with shame, but with remembrance. As the service proceeded and the pastor's voice filled the hall, Nina still heard whispers around her, some curious, some regretful. Maybe her mother was wrong. No one really knows what happened to her, but it must have taken courage to come. She kept her journal in her lap, but etched that moment into memory. Late that night, she wrote, "People whispered, first about my past, then about my name, then about my courage." No one spoke aloud, but sometimes the loudest echoes begin in the softest voices. Time in the church was sluggish and silent, like the slanted rays of light seeping through heavy curtains. Between the pastor's prayers, the only sound Nina heard was her own heartbeat, her eyes locked on one single point, the casket. Richard Carter was now contained in that wooden box. Even in life he had hidden in shadows. Now he lay buried in an eternal darkness. Nina wanted just one moment to say goodbye. When the service ended, people filed out, some bowing their heads to avoid her gaze, others still whispering. But to Nina, this moment was not about the crowd or their opinions. It was the final connection between a father and his daughter. Her steps quickened, silently, purposefully. No one stepped aside, but no one stopped her either, because her determination weighed like a shroud of mourning. When she reached the casket, her knees trembled. All the burdens she had carried over the years seemed to rest in front of her now. She bent over and placed her hand on the cold walnut surface. Then, closing her eyes, she drew a deep breath and whispered, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you either." The words barely escaped her lips, but they emerged from the heaviest silence she had ever known. The truth. For years, she had tried to shield her father from her mother's anger, and her mother's from her father's passivity. Yet he was a child too, and he could not protect her. They had both been wounded without ever being able to protect one another. A single tear fell onto the casket. She did not wipe it away, for that tear did not represent anger, but peace. She took another breath, opened her eyes one last time to the casket and said, "Goodbye, Dad." At that moment, 2 police officers raced through the church doors, one holding a phone displaying her mother's name. Their eyes locked onto Nina, but Mr. Whitmore quickly stepped forward, quietly speaking to them. One officer nodded. They did not approach Nina. They did not ask a single question, because Nina had already walked out of the church. She did so without bowing her head, walking neither as a criminal nor as a supplicant, but as a witness. When she stepped into the daylight, the sky had cleared. Sunlight gently filtered through the clouds, and Nina felt a weight on her shoulders ease, perhaps for the first time. That night she wrote, "I couldn't protect my father, and he couldn't protect me, but that doesn't mean we didn't love each other. It just means we remained silent together. Today I spoke, and I sent him off, not with anyone's permission, but as my own right." The morning after the funeral, Nina expected nothing. No messages, no apologies, no solace, just silence in the house. Yet when she checked the mailbox, a single envelope changed her entire day, perhaps her entire past. She set her coffee cup down, and there was a faint thump as something slid under the door. A pale, white envelope bearing her name, written in a familiar hand, Nina Carter. No return address, but the postmark's date was unmistakable, 6 months ago. In the corner, a faint signature, R. Carter. Nina's hand trembled as she picked up the envelope. Time itself seemed to rewind. Her heart pounded, she gasped. She slit the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper filled with her father Richard's handwriting. Messy, hurried, but every word a raw, urgent cry. "Nina, if you are reading this, I am probably not alive anymore. I wanted to say this to you face to face, but whenever I tried, the words choked in my throat. Maybe I was scared, or afraid of hurting you more. But now I must speak. As your father, I have always loved you. I may never have said it properly. Maybe I never looked into your eyes enough, but in my heart, you were always there. I saw how everything between your mother and me affected you, and when I realized there was nothing I could do, I lost you most of all. If anything happens to me, do not let your mother erase you. Do not let yourself be erased either. You exist. You have lived. You are our quiet but strongest child. Remind them you matter. Do not let them make you disappear. I have always loved you, and if I ever failed to love you enough, I am sorry. Your father, Richard. As Nina read his words, tears fell silently down her cheeks. Each line seemed to fill the emptiness she'd carried for years. Her father had seen her, had loved her, and above all, had not forgotten her. This was more than an apology. It was a gentle shroud placed over the past, acknowledging the pain that remained, but giving it meaning. She pressed the letter to her chest, closed her eyes and whispered, "I am not alone anymore. Maybe I was never fully alone." Late that night, she wrote in her journal, "A love written 6 months ago gave me breath today. Even after death, my father reminded me how to live. Do not let them erase you," he said. "And now, I will begin this fight in earnest." Reading that letter for the third time, one phrase echoed louder each time. Do not let them erase you. Do not let them make you disappear. But it was no longer a mere emotional plea. It seemed like a call to action, a simple direction. Then her eyes settled on another sentence. "If anything happens to me, I want you to visit our old friend, Mr. Livingston." Mr. Livingston. Nina recognized that name from years ago, his small law office just a few blocks from her old house. Every year her father would stop by, saying it was for insurance matters, but Nina suspected it was more than that. The next morning, she tucked her father's letter into her bag and set out for that old neighborhood. The streets felt familiar, yet suddenly smaller, as if time had shrunk everything. But there, still standing, was Mr. Livingston's sign, Livingston and Company, Legal Counsel. She knocked on the door. From inside, an elderly man looked up, lifting his glasses. Then his eyes widened. "Nina?" "Yes. Do you remember me?" "Of course. Your eyes look just like your father's." He stood as though he had been waiting for her and motioned her to sit. "Come in. I have something to show you." Nina held her breath. Mr. Livingston retrieved a locked file from a drawer. He removed the key from his inner jacket pocket and turned it slowly. Inside was a single envelope labeled, "Nina Carter, do not open until my death." Mr. Livingston spoke in a solemn voice. "Your father updated this will 6 months ago. He specifically asked that your mother not be told. In fact, she still thinks the old will is in effect." He handed the envelope to Nina. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a concise, clear testament. "I, Richard Carter, of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my personal assets, my bank accounts, and my interest in the house to my daughter, Nina Carter. She, unlike everyone who cast her out, has always carried a piece of me with her. This decision is final." Nina felt her hands go numb. Tears streamed unbidden. This was not merely an inheritance, but an affirmation, an acceptance, a form of atonement. Her father had given back what was rightfully hers, not just his material estate, but her visibility, her name, her place in the family. She looked up at Mr. Livingston and asked, "Does my mother know about this?" "Number, they still believe the old will is valid, but this document is official and ready to take effect. Only one thing was missing." Nina narrowed her eyes. "What?" "Your acceptance of it." For a long moment there was only silence. Then Nina lifted her chin and said, "Very well. The time has come." That evening, she jotted a single line in her journal. "Today, I am not reclaiming property, but reclaiming my rightful place." Turning the envelope over, she saw "Executor" printed in large letters at the top. Beneath were these lines: "Nina Carter is appointed the legal executor of this will." As her eyes traced those words, something tightened in her throat. This was not a mere designation, it was her father's final decree. Nina was not just a beneficiary, she was now the steward of her family's entire legacy. Mr. Livingston leaned back in his chair and explained, "With this, your mother or any other family member can no longer make unilateral decisions. The sale of the house, distribution of possessions, access to bank accounts, all require your signature now." Nina stared at the document. After years of being excluded, silenced, invisible, she was now the one with legal authority. It felt like fate's irony, but from now on, she would set its rules. Mr. Livingston continued, "Your father said there were additional papers hidden in the old study, in a box behind the fireplace." Nina's mind raced back. Her father loved the fireplace, especially in winter, never letting anyone else touch it. He always said, "That's my corner." She stood and, clutching her father's letter, asked, "If my mother finds out?" "She will," he said quietly, "but this time, you will be the one to deliver the truth." Nina left his office carrying more than a mere piece of paper. She carried the power to shatter years of silence. That night, she wrote, "Since my mother erased me from that house, for the first time my name is written next to executor. This isn't just an inheritance, it's my father's overdue justice." Walking up to the front door of her childhood home, Nina's steps were slow but resolute. The door she once trembled before was now just a wooden panel, one that bore her name in the will. She placed her hand on the doorknob but did not knock. The door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open gently. Inside, the air smelled the same, old furniture polish mixed with years of simmering resentment. Down the hall, the kitchen light glowed, and she heard footsteps approach. There, in the doorway, stood her mother, hair undone, wearing a robe, holding a mug of coffee. Nina saw her freeze, then scowl. "Why are you here?" Laura's voice was cold, clipped. Nina took the file from her bag and said evenly, almost without pity, "Because I am one of the legal heirs of this house. This is my father's final will." Her mother stepped forward and seized the documents. She scanned the pages, her eyes narrowing, her face paling, her hands trembling, yet her voice was still laced with arrogance. This must be a forgery. It's notarized, and Mr. Livingston can testify," Nina replied calmly. Laura remained silent. The house was truly still, as though even the walls had held their breath, witness to years of suppressed words and buried voices. Nina met her mother's gaze and said, "You kept me out of this house for years. You stifled every word my father ever left for me. But he spoke at last, and I am here." For the first time, Laura took a step back, but not out of deference, out of guilt. Nina crossed the threshold and let her eyes wander across the living room, over family photos, as if examining her own past for the first time. Then her gaze landed on the fireplace in the corner of the room. Ashes still lay in its hearth, gathering dust. Nina remembered how her father cherished that place. She knelt before the hearth and traced her fingers along a barely perceptible seam in the wood paneling. As she pressed, there was a faint click. The panel shifted, revealing a small metal box with no lock. Inside it lay old envelopes, a photo album, and a single cassette tape. Nina's hands trembled as she opened one of the envelopes, her father's scribble on the front. "For Nina, open when the time is right." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. These were not tears of sorrow, but tears of revelation. Tonight she would write, "This house shut me out for so long, but now I have opened its secret. What I found inside will expose the masks of everyone who tried to silence me." At the very bottom of that hidden box, beneath faded envelopes and old photographs, lay a small, worn, leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, corners frayed, yet on it, in tiny stamped letters, was still visible the single word, journal. When Nina held it, a mixture of fear and hope surged through her. Her father had been a man of few words, reserving his thoughts for isolation. Could it be that within this journal lay all the things he had never spoken aloud? She opened it to the first page. A date was scrawled at the top, January 2012. That was the year Nina had graduated from university, and the same year her mother cut off all contact with her. On the second page, the handwriting was shaky but clear. Nina's eyes began to trace the lines as though they were a whisper from the past. Today, Nina faced Laura's anger again. I raised my voice because she was just late for breakfast. My daughter did not say a word. She quietly got up from the table. Her silence is tearing me apart, but I am too cowardly to speak out. Nina's eyes brimmed and stung. The next entry was even harsher. With each passing day, Laura erodes Nina a little more. I just watch. My duty was to protect my daughter, but I am a coward. And then, page after page, her father poured out his conscience. Laura's sharp rebukes, the psychological strain, Nina locking herself in her room to cry. Each entry was a snapshot of emotional turmoil, and each concluded with her father's anguish. If this girl, who calls me Dad, had been given to another family, she might have been spared some wounds. But here I am, the man who silently allowed her to become a stranger in her own home, and I cannot forgive myself. Nina clutched the journal to her chest. At last, she held the words she'd been waiting for. Unlike the family that tried to erase her, someone had heard her silence, and at least recorded it. In that quiet night, she felt her father's voice reach her for the first time. This was not merely a diary, but an outpouring of confession, a testament to every suppressed cry from the past. Late that night, she wrote in her own journal, "I never heard you say you were proud of me, but I know now that you saw my pain. This journal is the apology letter I searched for, and now I will prove, loud and clear, that I truly exist." In the center of the living room, two women faced each other. One was the mother who had ruled this house for years, feeding off silence. The other was the daughter who had risen from that silence to reclaim her voice. Nina gripped her father's journal tightly. Her mother's eyes flicked away. Laura didn't ask what she held. She already knew. She had never imagined her husband would leave something like this behind, let alone something so honest. Nina took her first step, her voice steady, unwavering, as she said, "You didn't throw me out to protect me from my father. You threw me out to protect yourself from his truth." Laura recoiled but quickly went on the defensive. "I was trying to protect you. That man was silent, powerless. I had to run things here myself." Nina shook her head, tears in her eyes, yet she did not cry. "No. You tried to protect me from his love for me, because he never shared that love with you." For the first time, Laura fell silent. Nina flipped to a page in the journal and read, "With each passing day, Laura erodes Nina a little more. I just watch. My duty was to protect my daughter, but I am a coward." It was as if those words struck her like a hammer to a wall, tearing down layers of years in an instant. Yet, stubbornly, she whispered, "He may have left that journal, but he didn't leave me a thing." Nina took a steadying breath and said with clear eyes, "Maybe he had nothing left to give you, because you took everything. You silenced me. You subdued him. But the truth is, now written in ink, Mother. No matter how much you deny it, it is my voice now, not yours." Laura's expression cracked for the first time. Her gaze, once unwavering, trembled, but she did not respond. Instead, she resumed hiding behind silence, that wall she had built for so long. Nina turned and walked away. She did not wait for an answer, because she had already received one. Silence, and not the kind meant to silence her, but the kind that recognizes defeat. That night she wrote in her journal, "I did not grow up with your lies. I grew up with his truth. Now every word you tried to silence will shine like letters that lifted me up." Late at night, as Nina sat by her window, one memory from the buried pages of that journal re-emerged with vivid pain. She had been 9 years old when her mother shattered her world. One afternoon, she came home from school to find her mother at the door, face twisted with anger, voice like a blade. "I am ashamed of you, Nina. Your teacher called. You stole Chloe's necklace. Chloe was her cousin. Chloe visited their house often and always got more attention. On that day, Chloe came home in tears. My necklace box was empty. No one else investigated, and every finger pointed at Nina. No matter how she protested, no one wanted to hear her side. Her mother locked her in her room for a week, even sliding her meals under the door. Her father said nothing, and that wound cut deepest of all. Years later, when Nina was in her 20s, Chloe had texted her on a quiet evening. "I hid that necklace. I just wanted to see how you would react. I'm truly sorry." Nina never shared that message, because at the time, she still clung to a hope of reconciliation. But now, she knew the truth had to pierce the silence. She pulled that message from her journal and read it aloud. "For years, I moved from place to place under the weight of a lie. And to my mother, the truth never mattered. In her eyes, I was guilty simply for being myself." That night, in her own diary, she wrote a confession. "I too stayed silent for years, hoping someone would hear me. But every moment I stayed quiet, they only grew more confident. Now I refuse to be silent. For the first time, I reclaimed something more valuable than that necklace, my dignity." Years after her name had been uttered, only among shame and silence in her family home, Nina now held a microphone in her hand. She stood on a small stage before a modest but eager audience. Her father's former co-workers, neighbors, a few teachers. They filled the room, sitting in front of a simple, black-framed display table. Her father's books, an old photograph, a pair of thick-framed glasses, and in Nina's hands was a folded note, torn from her journal. The room fell silent as Nina moved toward the microphone. But this silence was no longer directed at her. This was the silence of an audience waiting to listen. Her voice rose, steady and unafraid. "To speak my father's name here tonight was something I never imagined I could do. He was not a perfect man, none of us are, and perhaps the moment I acknowledged that, I could finally begin to forgive." Her eyes drifted to a vacant chair at the back of the room, knowing her mother would not be there to hear these words. But she knew they would still reach her in some way. "For years, I believed my father was silent, but in reality, he was suppressed. Through his writing, he revealed a side I never knew, and because of those words, I not only remember him, I learned to respect him." A few in the audience bowed their heads, and some dabbed at their eyes. She continued, "A child wants to see love from family. But sometimes, love hides in a sentence that comes too late. I found that sentence, and now, I have forgiven my father. I love him. And tonight, I speak on his behalf, because I will no longer be silent." There was a moment of hush. Then, like a wave, applause broke out. Uncertain at first, then growing stronger, until the room filled with clapping. Nina lowered her head and gently placed the folded note in her pocket. In her mind, a single line crystallized. "Sometimes you cannot hear your own voice until someone dares to speak it for you. My father left me his voice at last. Now I carry his legacy with my own." It was after midnight when the phone rang again. The number was familiar, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. Tense, hurried, distant. "Your aunt is in the hospital. She's in intensive care. If you can come, come now." Once upon a time, a message like that might have shattered Nina. But now, she closed her eyes and drew a steadying breath. That night's silence was not new. She had grown up in it. She had been abandoned by it. By dawn, she was at the hospital. The halls were nearly empty, lit by dim lights that held no promise of morning. When the receptionist gave her a room number, Nina walked down the corridor in measured, determined steps, no longer feeling she had to hurry for anyone. She entered the room. Her mother lay in the hospital bed, eyes open but vacant, frail, shrunken. Time had reduced this once formidable woman into a fragile shadow. Their eyes met. For the first time, Nina's first word was still her own, but it was different from all the times before. "I did not come to forgive you. nor to comfort you. Laura didn't look away. She said nothing. Nina carried on, voice clear. I came to protect myself, to leave behind the silence you forced on me. I do not wish that you die alone, but know this, I have always been alone even when I was with you. A nurse entered, nodded quietly to Nina and left. The room returned to its hush. Nina took another step forward and approached her mother's bedside, yet she did not touch her hand. Because sometimes compassion is measured not by a gesture but by its absence. You told me you never loved me, Nina said, but I have learned to love myself. Now, even in your absence, I will remain. She turned and walked away. For a final moment, she glanced back. Laura still lay there motionless. She said nothing, but this silence was different. It was a shadow of acceptance, not of cruelty. That night, Nina wrote, I visited my mother today. But little Nina was not there. Instead, I found a woman grown, someone who sets her own boundaries, who knows she doesn't have to earn love. That woman was me. Once, Nina Carter's name in that house had been spoken only with blame, shame, and silence. Now, her name filled the display windows of bookstores in bold letters. The daughter they tried to erase, Nina Carter. The cover was simple and stark, a black and white illustration of a flower breaking through concrete. Below it, a single line gleamed. They said they didn't love me. I learned to love myself louder. Within weeks of publication, social media erupted. Readers shared Nina's journey through emotional abuse, familial exclusion, and the reclamation of her inner strength, line by line. Among thousands of comments, one read, I am a Nina, too. This book awakened the voice I have silenced inside for years. Interview requests flooded in, women's magazines, psychology journals, television programs. But Nina accepted just one, a quiet local radio show. The host asked, Nina, why did you write this book? Her answer was unflinching. I wrote it not for those who tried to silence me, but for those who have been silenced. Her book was not merely a personal narrative, but a manifesto for anyone whose feelings had been repressed, a testament to guilt, invisibility, and, above all, the power of self-healing. At a book fair one afternoon, someone from the audience recognized her, an old classmate with tears in her eyes. We thought you were silent. It turns out, you were just waiting for the right moment. Nina smiled as she signed the cover. Never had she spoken with such confidence when those words flowed from her lips. Some people need to shout to be heard. I chose to write. On the final page of her book was a sentence that summed up her life. She chose to remain herself without screaming, without anger, simply by clinging to her own truth. They said they didn't love me. I learned to love myself louder. And perhaps that was why Nina's story reached millions. Because she did not just tell her own story, she became the voice of every silenced child who longed to be seen.